What's up everyone? Welcome to another Joel Arsenault YouTube video. I hope you're all well. Thanks for hanging out with me here. I really do appreciate it. As the title suggests, in this video I'm doing some more work on Jacob's bullet in preparation for the STX 1500 swap. In the last video I did a bunch of modifications on the pump, and in this video I'm going to be fitting the pump. Once the pump is actually fit, we'll be able to tell what modifications we have to do to the ride plate, as well as the nozzle and steering nozzle. So that's what this video is going to be all about. If you guys want to support me on Patreon, there is a link in the description below. Every little bit helps. If you want to see random nonsense, extras, and outtakes, that is on my second channel, which is called Lowered Expectations. Link also in the description below. These are the 4-threaded inserts for mounting the pump, and the pump is installed like this, which means I need to put some holes through this bracket. But in order to know where I'm going to put those holes, I need to mark it in some way. So what I'm going to do is actually get something that threads into the hole. Then I'm going to slide the pump in place, and then I'm going to hammer down onto the mounting bracket so that it leaves a center punch mark so that I know exactly where to drill the hole. Basically what I need is a center punch that threads into a hole. This hole happens to be 8mm by 1.25 thread pitch. And so I've got this bolt, which is exactly that, 8mm by 1.25. And I'm going to turn this into my center punch. I don't want to damage these threads because any damage to these threads could either damage the threads that I'm putting it in or get it stuck in there, and we don't want either of those things to happen. So I've made a special tool to accommodate this, and I've actually done it off camera. This is a 8 by 1.25 nut, and the bolt threads into that nut. And then once I tighten this in either a vise or in the chuck on my lathe in this case, it will tighten down, hold the bolt still, and not allow the threads to get damaged. Sometimes basic tools are the answer. I'm just going to use a hacksaw to cut this off because it is actually the quickest way to go about doing it. Now that I have the bolt cut to length, I'm going to remove some of these threads and sharpen the tip of this to a point. I now have the tip of this sharpened to a point. I'm not sure how well that picks up on camera. But what I need now is to make a hex on the tip of this so that I can thread it in and out of holes without having any issues. I don't have a fancy indexing tool, but I can use this nut once again in the vise on my mill to index this part and cut a hex onto the top of this. So let's do that now. Once you have it figured out how much you're going to cut off, what you can actually do is cut one side, loosen the vise, rotate your part, do another cut, and just keep doing that. So that's what I'm going to do. I've figured out that I have to take about 21 thousandths of an inch off each side. So let's hope this works out. Now all I need to do is thread this into the insert. Start it with my fingers and get a socket on it. Got that pointy little bit sticking out, so now I can install the pump, give a little tap down onto the pump, and that will leave a punch mark exactly at the center of this hole. It got a little bit marked up sliding it in, but I can quite clearly see the center hole there. So now I need to move it over to this one, and then this one, and then this one. I now have the holes drilled in the pump, but before I can mount it down, I actually need to build a shim for underneath each side of the pump. I don't know if the camera can pick this up, but there is about a 1/4 inch gap, actually exactly 6mm at the back side of the pump, and then it tapers down to nothing at the front. So I need a tapered shim that I will epoxy to the hull. I'm going to make that shim out of this piece of aluminum. This is the setup that I'm using to cut the angle on the part. I removed one of the bolts from my vise so that I could angle the vise at the same angle that I want to cut. Now when the table moves straight, the part is at an angle, so it will actually cut the angle that I want. I had to then put this hold down thing because the bolt no longer lines up with the T-slot. After a little bit of messing around, I have the shims made, except for drilling the holes. I still need to do that. So what I'm going to do now is hold these up to the pump, mark out where the holes are, and then I'm going to use some JB Weld to stick these down to the hull. Time for a little bit of a test fit, he said, knowing they already fit. There's that one. And there's that one. So now I gotta remove the pump, clean up the area underneath the shims and the shims themselves, give it a quick sanding, and then JB Weld those pieces down. I changed my mind and decided not to use JB Weld or epoxy. I'm just gonna use some of this ultra black to hold these in place. These just need to be held down so that they don't fall off when you're trying to get the pump on. So no reason to use epoxy or JB Weld. This will be plenty. And if they ever have to come off for some reason, they'll come off a whole lot easier this way without a whole lot of effort. All right, now I gotta not mess with this long enough so that that will cure. You guys just saw me making these. These are spacers for the ride plate. And so now is the moment of truth. I'm gonna test fit the ride plate. I don't have the steering nozzle on. I guess if this works, then I'll put the steering nozzle on and see if it still works with that. Okay, just barely fits. The only reason why it fits is because Jacob has already sanded this or ground that down. It just barely fits. All right, I'm gonna put the pump nozzle on now just with a couple of bolts and see if it still fits. What's going on there? Okay, so the steering nozzle has a high spot in it here. Wow, yeah, that's quite a bit. That's like half of an inch. What I was already considering doing is removing the trim mechanism from here because the trim won't be needed. I now have the trim piece and nozzle removed, and I'm trying to figure out what I can do with this now. I have the whatever this is called, cone, rotated 90 degrees, so the trim ordinarily would mount in these holes, but I'm going to try to mount a steering nozzle here. I could try doing this, but that would still mean modifying the steering arm on this. What I was thinking is I could offset this to one side, so I could modify the mounting bolt on the other side. But what I'm going to try to figure out before that, I actually have this other trim and steering part from, I believe it's an XI 750. Jacob sent me back with, and this has a steering arm that I could potentially actually use. If I make these fit in these holes, can I then offset the pump, and will that give me clearance? So in order to figure that out, I'm going to just hold this in place. I'm going to try to hold this in place and see if we have clearance like that. Oh wow, like millimeters. I now have the steering nozzle installed on the cone, and I've got it set right up against the cone there. And so I need to make a spacer that is this big. So I need a spacer that is 16 millimeters, plus it has to thread into there. So I need to thread a piece of aluminum. I'll use a piece of round bar, thread it so that it screws into there, put some red Loctite on it so it never comes out. And then I need to drill and tap the other side of it so that my pin can then thread in to the spacer. I now have the two sections marked off. This first section is going to be the threads, 15 millimeters of threads. That is going to be 8 by 1.25. I'm going to make the threads first, then I'll part this off just past this line. Then we can flip this over, face it off so that we have our actual 16 millimeters of spacing. Then we can actually test fit this. Then I'll put it back in the lathe, drill and tap a hole in it, and then our spacer will be done. We now have all our pieces ready. I'm going to install the spacer on what will be the bottom side of the nozzle. The threads come right out flush. I'm not sure if the camera can pick that up. And then the pump nozzle, or the steering nozzle rather, fits on there like that. You can now see the spacer is on there like that. And then this one will go in here. And now I have a steering nozzle mounted on there that's offset. I can now get the ride plate on, so let's test fit it. Just use 2 bolts for the test fitting. As you guys can see, hopefully the piece here does not hit anymore. It's got lots of steering range, and the nozzle actually comes out pretty far, so we might not need to modify it. And our steering cable hooks up. Everything is hooked up. So now we just got to test fit the ride plate and see if we have clearance. I have the ride plate sitting on top of the shims, so we can take a look in there now and see how much clearance we actually have. I've got my phone in there as a light so that you guys can actually see, and it looks like we've got probably about 4 millimeters, between 4 and 5 millimeters. So as long as it's not touching, we're golden, and it's not touching. And that is where this video ends. I was hoping to get more done, but I was held back a little bit by my knee. Definitely not complaining because my knee is doing really well, all things considered. I just wasn't able to spend a whole lot of time bent over or crouched over on my knees, and as you guys can see, the bullet hole is on the floor. I couldn't risk trying to lift it up onto stands and hurting myself, so I just did the work on it there. Next up in this project will probably be fitting the engine and getting that fired up. I'm not going to make 1,000 videos about doing the pump and the steering and all that stuff, so I'll probably just do a little bit of filming on that and update you guys before installing the engine. But I'm not going to make 100 videos or 1,000 videos about the intake grade and the ride plate and all that stuff. So quick update, and then we'll jump into installing the engine and getting that running. Next up, however, is probably going to be some porting work on the crash engine before I put it back together. It's not horrible, but before I put it together, I figure I might as well do some cleanup work on it. And yeah, so that will probably be one of my next videos. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. I really appreciate your support. If you liked it, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed, you're going to want to do that so that you can see the continuation of this project and some of the other stuff that I'm working on. If you want to support me on Patreon, there is a link in the description below. I could certainly use your help. And if you want to see outtakes, extras, and random nonsense, that's my second channel, Lowered Expectations, which is also in the description below. That's going to do it for this one. I will see you guys next time.